Yeah, I'm always reminded of what Toni Morrison sort of pushes us to engage, this idea that like white supremacy, racism is always the work of distraction. The police, for instance, would love for you to spend all day fighting about the statues, right? They are like, cool, please fight about the statues.
If I let the statues and the images and all of the news about getting rid of that, if I start focusing on that, I will not focus on what's important in November.
Logos and mascots may seem like a distraction on one level, but they symbolize so much racial oppression. It is timely to have these conversations.
Doing something symbolic like that doesn't actually do anything to address any of the inequities on our campus.
Performative allyship is what it is. It's a performance, and it's gonna end.
Changing the name of sports teams, changing the packaging of a pancake mix, is it all just a kind of distraction from actual justice and political change? I think that a question like that is itself a little reductive.
My name is Joshua Mannery. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, born and raised. The University of Mississippi has become my home. I am a senior political science and English double major, and I currently serve as student body president. As a student here, nothing shocks me anymore. One day you wake up and you have 3 IFC men posed beside an Emmett Till statue that they may or may not have shot up. You wake up another day and you find out that your administration has been covering up, alumni who expressed racist or derogatory remarks. You wake up another day and you find out that white supremacist groups are coming to your campus on a random Friday afternoon, and it's nothing you can do about it. You have to take all of that in, and it's really hard to be a student here and tune out of that, especially as a student of color. We had a Confederate statue, a random soldier, nobody particularly important, in the heart of our campus. So right when you drove in and you drove into our circle, and of course the circle was at the heart of the institution, he was the first thing you saw.
I'm standing here in the middle of campus where the controversial Confederate statue is placed.
For a lot of students of color, specifically black students, black faculty, black staff, it was important that we got that statue removed. Now was the moment.
As protests over the death of George Floyd in police custody continue, from Brooklyn and Atlanta to Los Angeles and dozens of other cities,
protesters took action, tearing down memorials to the country's racist history.
We decided to create You Move, so hashtag You Move the statue. We had social media graphics breaking down what the statue meant and its history. It was just like this big educational / advocacy effort to finish the hard work laid by a lot of past student leadership. For us students, all we wanted to see happen was the statue get relocated to the cemetery, and that's it. Administration said that we had to do some landscaping, we had to add some lighting for security camera purposes. We had to add some headstones to make sure that we knew who was buried where, which is a lot of the controversy that happened this past June and July. They said Confederate Cemetery, but to us it was Confederate Park. There's a noticeable lack of empathy. The fact that statues have so much debate and so much back and forth is a pretty clear indication to me that the experiences and the pain that a lot of people of color, not only on this campus but around the country, are feeling, they're not being heard. If it takes 3 years to remove a nameless statue of a Confederate soldier, and like that 3-year number is slightly embarrassing and a little bit shameful, honestly. The university is a perfect microcosm of our country. And so I am worried because I think we've already kind of missed the mark as a country.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of what Toni Morrison sort of pushes us to engage, this idea that like white supremacy, racism is always the work of distraction, right? Like that is sort of the task. I'm DeRay McKesson. I'm an activist, one of the co-founders of Campaign Zero, and we believe we can live in a world where the police don't kill people. So much of our work is focused on how do we change structures and systems to make sure that happens. I think that this moment is interesting because there are more people who sort of understand and believe than before, but there are a lot of people who don't know what to do. And people are frankly like more interested in the rhetoric around that than like the actual sort of meat and potatoes around how you make that happen. And I think that's like the sad reality. And I think about the conversation about imagery sort of reminds me of that like the police, for instance, would love for you to spend all day fighting about the statues, right? They are like, cool, please fight about the statues. Not that the statues don't matter, right? They're like symbols of hate encourage hate, so we can get rid of it. But they know that like the public conversation normally can only do one thing at a time. Like that's the way the media is set up. So it will never be like police union clauses and statues. It'll always be one or the other. And the statues are just a better story. They're like an easier story to tell.
Even removing these things, the textbooks are still there. The textbooks still tell a historical lesson of who our leaders are, who our heroes are. And again, we believe that to be true. We walk past it, we're like, this guy did something good. There's a statue of him. He had to do something good. And I'm not gonna bother to learn history. I'm not gonna bother to read any authors that are Black because that can't be true. There's a statue of this guy. So it fights the true stories of America.
A lot of these statues were put up as a deliberate attempt to forget or to misremember history. A deliberate attempt to say that, no, the South wasn't a vile, immoral, slave-holding breakaway state, that it was this kind of glorious, chivalric, almost romantic nation that was crushed in what they started calling the War of Northern Aggression. The United Daughters of the Confederacy were a women's auxiliary group founded in Nashville, Tennessee in 1894, and their job was to kind of venerate the losses of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. Well, one of the first things they did was to raise funds for memorials to Confederate soldiers, Confederate generals, Confederate leaders. These statues and monuments first originated in cemeteries and then kind of made their way into town squares in front of city halls in the South. Whenever statues are toppled, especially during the wake of the George Floyd protests, there's this kind of argument that, well, this is history. We don't want to forget our history.
It's not a false history. A monument was put up there by real people who had real beliefs. Maybe we don't like their beliefs, but one of the things that bothers me most as a historian is what I call presentism, judging the past by the present, figuring that we're the only moral people, that nobody else who could be moral if they didn't think like we think.
People have tried to overcomplicate it all they want, but really I think it is a symbol of slavery and white supremacy. Well, once you had the statues in public spaces, and once you had this idea of the Confederate cause as being a noble or chivalric or lost cause, it was very easy to kind of soften this imagery and work it into pop culture. Gone with the Wind is a key example of a film that offers this kind of lost cause notion of a bygone romantic South. You also have stuff like Disney's Song of the South. I mean, you don't have to go very deep to see this stuff. I think around probably the 60s and 70s, the Confederate flag almost becoming a kitsch object. You would see it on bumper stickers, belt buckles, hats that you could buy at a truck stop. Of course, on television, the best example is the show Dukes of Hazzard, where this flag is on top of a car that's literally called General Lee. And I think what happened there is this sort of notion of it being not the flag of the slaveholding South, but the battle flag. That's where this really took root. This idea that the Confederate flag meant rebellion, it meant standing up for what's right, etc., etc., etc.
On average, each day, each of us sees about 5,000 imprints of advertisements. I would say all advertising is racialized. The idea behind what messaging is really going to resonate with the vast amount of the population, which is white folks in America, is that of we are the champions, we are the heroes, we are the ones that are going to save the world and steward the folks, whether it be Native Americans or African Americans, immigrants. It's our job to be the stewards of these folks.
So Native American mascots are totally part of this narrative of colonization. So following the Civil War, news writers exacerbated the trope of natives as sort of savages and as people that were sort of there to be conquered, when they would write about sports teams and they would write about games, right? So even, for example, you have schools with headlines like, so-and-so scalps the Indians. It's not even a metaphor anymore. I mean, it's a really sort of violent recounting of what happens on the American plains. And that's part of where the sort of sports thing comes into play, is that a lot of times the imagery, the stereotype that gets played is about actually physical violence and conflict, where you have people going out and hunting down natives because they're seen as being something savage and something to be conquered and sort of, killed. And those things really come together for sport, because part of what sport is a lens on who we are as people.
We can't have a just and equal society if we're still using race-based mascots, if we're still using racist images of people to garner fans' affection. Like, that's not okay. My name is Heather Miller. I am an enrolled member of the Wyandotte Nation from Oklahoma. The mascot issue is really personal to me because I grew up off my reservation. I grew up away from my tribe. When I learned that I was Native American, I looked all over the place to find images, and a lot of what I'd learned about my heritage and learned about myself, it didn't jive. It didn't make sense. I don't think of teepees. I don't think of war bonnets or headdresses, because those aren't images that my tribe used. In Chicago, we have a national sports team that has an Indian logo, an Indian mascot. It's an image of Chief Blackhawk, and this image was created by the owner's wife, who's non-Indian. So she took a picture that she found of Chief Blackhawk and created this logo. Blackhawk would not have had feathers like displayed on the Blackhawks logo. That's creating an image of an Indian that's not really true, not really accurate, and it's not coming from our own voices, our own perspectives. In my 3 years as director, we have tried to engage the Blackhawks in conversation, but the organization has been very unresponsive.
Just awareness isn't enough. That the only way to uproot institutions is at the root, right? It is structural. It is laws and policies and money, that matters.
Logos and mascots may seem like a distraction on one level, but they symbolize so much racial oppression and problems that we need to address, that it is timely to have these conversations.
It's something simple like that. When you have an idea of an image and you turn it into an object, that object becomes something that we touch. There is an entire museum called the Crone Museum that is the largest building of racist caricatures that were just ideas that became objects, to salt and pepper shakers, of slaves, of mammies. They become real. It becomes something that exists forever.
Smiling, happy Aunt Jemima, famous for her secret recipe pancakes, waffles, and buckwheat.
Greetings, folks, greetings. This is your old friend, Aunt Jemima.
Aunt Jemima becomes a brand. We have two intrepid young entrepreneurs, white men, Chris Rutt and Charles Underwood. They're trying to figure out how best to brand it. Chris decides to go see a minstrel show. And in that minstrel show, there's a song called Old Aunt Jemima. That song has a character, Aunt Jemima, who's a mammy. He takes affinity to this character and thinks this is a great way to brand this product. And lo and behold, that is the birth of Aunt Jemima. The next year, they end up selling the product. R.T. Davis has a very strong branding background. He decides to actually hire someone to become the spokesperson to enact, to live this character called Aunt Jemima. They were looking for someone that could fulfill this stereotype, this trope of the mammy. Someone who's usually larger set, typically darker skin, someone who's thought of as being very happy-go-lucky, very loyal to the people that she serves. And so Nancy Green, about a 60-year-old black woman who was born a slave, becomes the first true spokesperson for Aunt Jemima and takes on that embodiment.
I am Vera Richard Harris. I am one of the descendants of Lillian Richard, one of the Aunt Jemimas that portrayed the Aunt Jemimas in the early 1900s. I retired from the U.S. Army after serving 30 years. And I told some of my battle buddies that one of the Aunt Jemimas was my aunt. They looked at me like, what are you talking about? Was that real? My Aunt Lillian was born March the 23rd, 1891. She was the fifth child of 11 siblings. She wanted to make a better life for herself, so she went to Dallas. And at the age of 20, she was discovered by Quaker Oats. I knew, from an early age that my Aunt Lillian was not only ambassador, she was a spokesperson, she was their marketing person. So I knew that her image was real. And she would go to fairs, conventions, and she would make the pancakes, serve the pancakes, and did her part in promoting the Aunt Jemima pancakes for Quaker Oats. She was a go-getter.
Quaker, the latest company to take action as demonstrations protesting racial inequality continue across the country. Owned by PepsiCo, announced the change in a statement. We recognize Aunt Jemima's origins are based on a racial stereotype, promising to make progress toward racial equality.
They jumped on the bandwagon to, okay, yeah, you're right, we wanna fix this real quick. But they forgot that there were families that was connected to those ambassadors. And they just they didn't even ask or reach out or try to research and see were there any living descendants of these ambassadors that helped us. So on June the 30th, I received a response from Quaker Oats, and it reads, Vera, thank you for reaching out about our plans to change the Aunt Jemima brand. We know that this action represents a major shift for a brand that is more than 130 years old. What will not change is the delicious taste and great value of our products. As such, we stand behind our branding decision. Please know I have made our senior leaders aware of your position. Thank you, Christopher, Quaker Oats Consumer Relations. And I just do not want, especially my Aunt Lillian Richard, I do not want her legacy lost. My advice would be change the name, take the black lady off the cover of your syrup and your pancakes, but on the back, possibly, have the history of all 12 of them. Show them without their costume. Show Aunt Lillian on the back. Tell a little bit about how she came to Dallas in 1911 to find a job. That is good history. It does make me mad that these corporations are making billions of money off of images, and they're not really telling the real history. Does Quaker Oats and other companies owe us a great deal of gratitude? Definitely.
We can't say to move forward, we can't fix the pain, we can't put a Band-Aid on it when Black people still have not benefited financially, emotionally, and mentally from the horrors that existed in this country.
I think that in moments like this where there's a flare-up of interest, that people will do anything to make it look like they're doing something, right? So they will appoint a committee, they will give somebody a promotion, they will make a special, they will put somebody in the magazine cover, they'll take some photos. And when the dust settles, you're like, what changed? White supremacy will always sacrifice symbols to maintain structures. They will give you every statue, every flag. They will change the names of every building. And the reason that they're willing to do that is that they know that all of those symbolic changes are temporary as long as they control the structure. That's the game, right? So they will keep it. They're like, flag, change the flag. The curriculum will always be white people. The police already in 2020 have killed over 730 people, that it is at the same rate, same number as last year. There's nothing letting up. And that really is like a sobering reminder that the structures don't change, the outcomes literally will not change.
When I wrote this article for The Guardian, obviously people started getting into it with me about, you're trying to take away our heritage, we love our statues, I hug and kiss a statue every night, blah, 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 blah. I think the key thing that America can take away from denazification is that, first of all, it works. Denazification was a process, it was a term actually coined by the Americans at the Pentagon to sort of root through post-war Nazi Germany, take members of the Nazi Party out of power, eliminate monuments to Nazi leaders and people like Hitler, to tear down swastika flags. People have dealt with this process in Germany for decades, and it has instilled a sense of collective trauma and collective guilt and collective understanding and reckoning and a desire to do better. The other thing America can learn is that it takes a long time, but if you don't start today, then when are you going to do it?
Is this a moment of reckoning? I think it can be, but it will require not just communities of color pushing for this change to happen. It's going to require that white folks continue to push for it as well. Advertisers are looking at the bottom line, and we know that buying power amongst all consumers, the amount of money that people have in their pocket to spend on consumer goods is about $15 trillion across the US. 3.9 trillion of that comes from people of color, right? So the rest of that number, which is about 75% of all the buying power, is held by white Americans. And so if we want to see lasting change, it can't just be that 3.9 trillion in consumer power demanding it. That group has been demanding it for decades, if not hundreds of years, right? It's going to require all of us to push for this change. And right now is certainly that moment to see, is that going to be the case? I'm hopeful, but skeptical.
Well, in a perfect world, you could do both. You could address the symbolic and address the fundamental inequities in institutions that kind of prevent us from having a truly inclusive and equitable campus. And so for me, I would sacrifice 1 or 2 symbolic wins if I got 6 to 8, fundamental wins. But in a perfect world, you wouldn't have to choose. And I just hate the fact that we have to choose.
And if I let the statues and the images and all of the news about getting rid of that, if I start focusing on that, I will not focus on what's important in November. So I think we have to be careful as African American, we have to be careful as people of color to not get distracted by one thing and lose focus on something other that could be just as important. Images removal is important. The statues, removing them are important, but systemic racism still exists.
Being an ally comes with transformative justice. And the word transform is an action word. You have to physically change something that is happening. Whether that is even deplatforming yourself, whether that is organizations saying, I no longer can sit at this table where everyone is white. What action can you do? So organizations or brands would say, we have made this entire platform in our institution white. We have hired white people, our board is white, the person writing this post is white. I am going to relinquish my power. I'm going to deplatform myself. I'm going to remove everyone from this board, and I'm going to give up everything and hand this over to the people that I'm saying that I care about. That would be a tangible change.
Hey, thanks for checking out CBSN Originals on YouTube. If you want to watch more documentaries, download the free CBS News app on your phone, tablet, smart TV, or any streaming device. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking down here. Thanks for watching.